Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. Today, we're looking into a case that's really kind of, I don't know, disturbing. It raises some serious questions about human nature, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about Amarjeet Sada,
Okay.
this young boy from India, and some people are calling him, get this, the world's youngest serial killer. I mean, that's pretty intense. So the main thing we're using for this is a YouTube video. It's in Malayalam,
Uh-huh.
but it does have English subtitles, thankfully, so we can make sense of it all. And yeah, I mean, it's tough material, no question.
Right.
But we're not here to just like sensationalize this stuff.
Yeah.
We really want to try and get at what's going on here.
Absolutely. It's one of those cases that really makes you think about how much we really know about kids. You know, we always associate childhood with being innocent.
Yeah.
But then you get cases like this.
Right.
What do you do with that?
Yeah. How do you even wrap your head around something like that?
Hmm.
So to start off, let's try to get a picture of what this kid's life was like early on. The video talks about how his family was really struggling. They were living in poverty in a village in Bihar, India. And there's this one detail that really stuck with me. They mentioned that he didn't really have any toys.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, man, that's got to be significant, you know?
You're right. I mean, think about it. No toys, especially when you're little, that can really mess with how you develop. It makes you think about, like, a lack of resources,
Yeah.
not enough stimulation. His childhood must have been so different from what most of us would consider normal.
For sure. And then the video goes on to say that Amarjeet started acting differently. At first, he was just kind of a mischievous kid, you know? But then he got really quiet and withdrawn. I mean, could that be a sign that something was really wrong?
It could be. When you see a kid's behavior change that drastically, it's definitely a red flag. Could be a reaction to some kind of trauma. Could be a sign of mental health issues developing. It could even be his way of dealing with a tough situation,
Right.
whatever that was.
Yeah, and then at 7 years old, the unthinkable happens. He's left alone with his 6-month-old cousin. And he does something horrible. I mean, the brutality described in this video is just, I don't even know what to say.
It's tough to hear, that's for sure. And what makes it even more difficult is that, according to the video, Amarjeet showed no remorse, no emotion. It's like he was disconnected from what he'd done.
It's chilling, right?
And you see this lack of emotion a lot in cases where very young kids commit serious crimes. It
Yeah.
makes you question whether they even understand what they've done, if they can feel empathy. Their whole psychological development seems different.
It's like he was in some kind of fog or something. And then there's how his parents reacted. I mean, they didn't call the police or try to get him help.
Yeah.
They tried to cover it up
Right.
and just discipline him themselves.
Yeah. It's hard to understand.
It really is.
But we have to remember the cultural context. In some places, there's so much stigma around mental health issues and criminal behavior. Forget about it, especially within the family.
So they were probably caught between fear, shame,
Yes.
desperately trying to protect their family and their reputation.
Absolutely.
But tragically, it seems like their silence just made things worse.
Just a few months later, Amarjeet's baby sister died under mysterious circumstances too.
And the video really emphasizes the disturbing details, you know, and again, there's that chilling lack of emotion from Amarjeet. At this point, it's starting to look like a really scary pattern.
Oh, yeah.
This total lack of empathy that you just don't expect from a kid his age.
This is heavy stuff. I mean, what could have been going on in his mind? Was this really a kid driven by something so dark?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
We can guess, we can look at the research and theories,
Yeah.
but in the end, we're really trying to understand something incredibly profound, human behavior. And in this case, the behavior of a child. Right. And the story doesn't end there either. Another baby from the village, a 6-month-old named Khushbu,
Okay.
she disappears. And everyone's frantic, searching everywhere.
Oh, man.
And pretty quickly, suspicion falls on Amarjeet.
Oh, wow. So by this point, people were paying attention. They'd seen what happened before,
Yeah.
and they weren't going to let it slide.
And when they confronted him, he confessed. The video goes into detail about his confession. And it really shook the village, the whole community, and even beyond that.
Yeah, I bet. This is where things get really complicated. Because Amarjeet was so young.
He was only 8 at the time. I can't even imagine a kid that young standing trial for murder,
Right.
let alone being found guilty. What did the law in India even say about something like this?
Well, at that time, in India, a kid under 7 couldn't be held responsible for a crime.
Okay.
But even between 7 and 12, there was this presumption of innocence. It was really hard to prove that the kid actually understood what they were doing.
So even though he was taken into custody,
Yeah, he didn't have a normal trial.
right, instead of a trial, they put him under observation. He
Okay.
had to go through all these psychological evaluations.
Interesting.
And that's where we start to get some clues, even though they're limited and kind of controversial
Right.
about what might have been going on in his head.
And what did those evaluations show? What kind of insights did they give?
So the psychologists who looked at him, they had a few ideas. One was that maybe he couldn't tell right from wrong. Another was that he was showing signs of conduct disorder.
What's that?
It's a serious behavioral and emotional disorder. Kids with this, they're often aggressive, they can be cruel to animals,
Wow.
and they do things that cause a lot of destruction.
But isn't it really hard to tell for sure in such a young kid?
Oh yeah, for sure.
How accurate can those evaluations be when you're dealing with someone so young?
That's a great point. It's super complicated to evaluate kids, especially in extreme cases like this.
Their brains are still developing, their understanding of the world is changing all the time, and they can't always explain their thoughts and feelings clearly.
Right.
So those evaluations can give you some insight, sure, but you gotta be careful about jumping to conclusions.
Especially with a kid as young as Amarjeet.
Exactly.
There's another detail in the video that's really disturbing. They say that he might have actually enjoyed hurting people.
Oh, wow.
They even described him smiling and laughing while he was committing these acts. It's really hard to process.
It's incredibly disturbing. And it's something that psychologists have been studying for a long time. Some think it could be a sign of a really deep psychological problem,
Yeah.
while others say it might be a coping mechanism, like a way to detach from the horror of what they're doing.
Wow.
But again, with a kid so young, it's almost impossible to say for sure what was really going on.
I mean, if he really couldn't grasp the seriousness of his actions,
Right.
can we even hold him responsible like we would an adult?
That's the ethical dilemma at the heart of this whole case.
It is.
And it's something that societies all over the world struggle with.
Yeah.
How do you balance the need for justice with the fact that a child's brain is still developing, that their sense of morality is still evolving? Where do we draw the line between holding them accountable and understanding that they might not be fully responsible because of their age, trauma, or maybe even an undiagnosed mental health condition?
Man, that's heavy stuff to think about. What about Amarjeet after he was arrested? What happened to him?
Well, he ended up spending a few years in a juvenile facility. He got treatment and rehabilitation there. But we don't know much about what actually went on during that time
Yeah.
or the specifics of the treatment he received.
Right. The video says he was eventually released,
Okay.
but that the government's keeping a really tight lid on any information about his current life.
Yeah, I get that. From a privacy standpoint, it makes sense. But it does leave you with this uneasy feeling.
Yeah, like unfinished business.
Exactly. What happened to Amarjeet? Did he get the help he needed? Is he still a danger, or has he really changed?
It's a chilling thought. And like you said, this whole case really makes us think about some uncomfortable truths about what it means to be human.
Absolutely. It challenges everything we think we know about kids being innocent,
Yeah.
about whether someone so young can be truly evil, and about how we define justice and rehabilitation.
This has been a really insightful conversation,
Mhm.
even though it's been a tough one. I'm thinking about that whole nature versus nurture thing,
Right.
about the potential for darkness and for good that we all have inside us.
And maybe that's the most important thing to take away from all of this. Even when we're faced with something horrible, we have to keep trying to understand, to
Right.
find answers, and to work towards a world that's more just and compassionate.
Well said. We'll be right back to continue this deep dive into Amarjeet Sada's case after a quick break.
You know, one thing that really gets me about this whole case is the idea of rehabilitation. Like, is it even possible with someone like Amarjeet?
Yeah, that's a big question. And I don't think there's an easy answer. I mean, what does rehab even look like for a kid who's done something so awful?
You're telling me it's such a complicated issue. There's no magic formula, you know?
Yeah.
It takes a deep understanding of how kids develop,
Yeah.
all the psychology involved, and what's going on in their lives socially. It's not just about changing the behavior, it's about figuring out what's causing it in the first place.
And with Amarjeet, we're kind of in the dark about those early experiences. Like, we don't know if he saw violence at home,
Right.
if he was abused,
Yeah.
if there were any signs that something like this could happen.
Exactly. And not having that information, it's frustrating. You can only speculate so much.
Right.
You know, use the research we have and what we know from other cases to try and fill in the gaps. But Amberjeet's story is really its own thing, and it's
Yeah.
hard to pin down or explain easily.
It makes you wonder how much we can really understand, like, can we really get inside the head of a child who does something like this? Or are we always going to be limited by our own adult perspectives?
That's a deep thought, and it shows how limited we are when it comes to understanding other people,
Yeah.
especially a child who's been through trauma or might have a mental health issue that no one's diagnosed. We can analyze all the evidence we want.
Sure.
We can use all the psychological theories out there, but
Right.
we may never truly get what's going on in someone else's mind.
Which brings us back to rehabilitation. If we believe that even a kid who's capable of such terrible things can change,
Yeah.
what does that mean for how we deal with kids who commit crimes?
It means we gotta rethink those old ideas about punishment and revenge. We need to be more sophisticated in our approach. We have to think about how kids develop, and we have to believe that they can change.
Oh.
We need to put resources into programs that intervene early,
Right.
mental health services, support systems that can help these kids learn to cope, develop empathy, and make good choices.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
It means changing how society thinks about these things.
Yeah,
And it means being willing to invest in things that might not have an immediate impact.
absolutely. But if we can prevent tragedies from happening and create a society that's fairer and more compassionate,
Yeah.
that's worth it.
It's a complicated issue, for sure.
It is.
And there's no easy answer. But I think talking about it is important, understanding different perspectives, and thinking about the long-term effects of the choices we make as a society.
I agree. Cases like Amarjeet Sada's, they make us question everything we thought we knew about childhood,
Yeah.
about evil,
Well-
and about what our justice system is even for. They force us to ask hard questions
do.
and face some uncomfortable truths about how people behave. And in the end, they remind us that there are no easy answers.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. We can't oversimplify these situations.
No.
We have to acknowledge how complicated they are and resist the urge to come up with easy solutions.
That's where a deep dive like this is so valuable. It lets us explore these things in a thoughtful and informed way,
Yeah,
look at different angles,
right.
and come away with a more nuanced understanding of the world around us.
This has been intense, but really insightful. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the human mind, how delicate life is,
Yeah.
and how much we need compassion and understanding in this
Love it.
world.
Absolutely.
I hope our listeners are finding this as thought-provoking as I am.
Yeah,
I encourage everyone to keep digging into these issues,
right.
challenge their own beliefs,
For sure.
and help create a society that's more just and caring for everyone.
Well said.
We've covered a lot today, but before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your final thoughts on Amarjeet's case. What does it tell us about evil, about how our sense of right and wrong develops,
Okay.
and about the possibility of change, even in the most extreme situations?
It's a question that I think stays with you, doesn't it? Amarjeet's case, it's so rare, but it forces us to look at this really uncomfortable truth that even kids can have darkness inside them. That it also shows us that childhood is this time when so much is changing. The brain is still developing, and it can change in big ways.
So when we talk about evil,
Mm.
is that something you're born with? Or is it because of what happens to you, the things you go through?
The classic nature versus nurture debate. It's something that experts are still trying to figure out. There's no easy answer. Some researchers say it's genetics and personality traits that might make someone more likely to be violent. Others focus on what happens early in life, trauma, neglect, or being around violence. It's probably a mix of both, you know? Lots of things come together to create what we call evil.
And with Amarjeet, we just don't know much about those early years. Did he see violence at home? Was he abused? Were there any signs that something like this might happen?
And that's what's so frustrating but also fascinating about this case. We have this missing piece, this gap in what we know. We can only guess, really, and use the research we have and what we know from other cases to try to understand. But Amarjeet's story is so unique, it's hard to put it in a box or explain it easily.
It makes you think about our own ability to understand things, to feel empathy. Can we really get into the mind of a child who does something like this? Or are we always stuck seeing it from our grown-up point of view?
That's a great point, and it shows how limited we can be in understanding other people. We try to put the pieces together, look at the evidence, and use psychological theories, but we might never really get inside someone else's head, especially a child who's been through trauma or maybe has a mental health issue that no one's picked up on.
And that brings us back to rehabilitation. If we can accept that even a child who's capable of such awful things can still change, what does that mean for how we think about juvenile justice?
It means we have to go beyond just punishing kids and getting revenge. We need a more complex approach that takes into account how kids develop and that believes they can change. We need to invest in programs that help kids early on, mental health services, support systems that can help them learn to cope, develop empathy, and make good choices.
That's a huge task. It means changing how society views these things and being willing to put resources into things that might not have immediate results.
You're absolutely right. But if we can prevent these kinds of tragedies from happening and create a society that's more just and compassionate, isn't that worth it?
Absolutely. It's a tough issue with no easy solutions, but it's so important to keep talking about it, to understand the different points of view, and to think about the long-term effects of the choices we make as a society.
I think cases like Amarjit Sada's, they really shake up what we think we know about childhood, about evil, and about the whole point of our justice system. They make us ask really hard questions and face some uncomfortable truths about human nature. And ultimately, I think they remind us that there are no easy answers.
I think you're spot on there. We can't oversimplify these situations. We have to recognize how complex they are and avoid those simple solutions that people might gravitate towards.
And that's why deep dives like this are so valuable. They allow us to explore these topics in a thoughtful and informed way, to consider different perspectives, and to come away with a more nuanced understanding of the world.
This has been a heavy conversation, but also really insightful. I'm still grappling with the mysteries of the human mind, the fragility of life, and how desperately we need compassion and understanding in this world.
Couldn't agree more.
I hope our listeners have found it as thought-provoking as I have, and I encourage everyone to keep exploring these issues, to challenge their own assumptions, and to contribute to a more just and humane society for everyone.
Well said.
It's been great having you on to help unpack all of this. It's not easy stuff, but these are conversations worth having.
Definitely. It's been a privilege to be a part of this. Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We know it was a tough topic, but we truly believe it's a conversation that needs to happen. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving for a world where every child has the chance to thrive.